Andrew, for that. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and friends. Welcome to the East Midlands branch on this lovely evening. And a big thank you for all of you for attending this really good subject matter that we have in hand tonight. Just like to go through one or two housekeeping little bits first. If I could ask, please, I always ask this, if you can have your mics on mute. It's just so important so that we don't get any background noise that may disturb and put the speaker off. So, you know, it's just a matter of common courtesy. So please be aware of that. The other thing, with questions, please use the chat function to say hello to anybody you like, but with the questions that you will hopefully have for Jamie tonight, our speaker, can you prefix them with a capital Q so that our delivery team member can pull that off, identify it quite easily, and all the questions will be answered at the end of the speaker's presentation. When I say all, just be mindful that we've got a limited amount of time, so we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. What I would like to say is that we have a meeting on the 22nd of July. That's our next meeting at 7 o'clock, and it's about coaching safer behaviours in the workplace. So this could be interesting as well. We try to cover a variety of subject matters to reach all our members in the different fields that they work in. So moving on with that, tonight we have a really interesting and timely subject, as you know from the mailers, and looking at Legionella going back to work. The organisations are opening up, the businesses are opening up. So I think the presentation we have tonight is very timely. And so on that note, I would like to say a big thank you to Gemma Hallifield on our exec team for taking the lead on this event. And she's done this work on very short notice. So thank you, Gemma, for that. So our speaker tonight, I've mentioned Jamie a couple of times. Jamie Trainer is going to take us through the importance of risk assessing for Legionella and the consequences of not testing. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions at the end. So get them posted on there. And I'll hand over to you then, Jamie, please.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Alan, for the intro. Just to warn you, I do have a squeaky chair, but I can't do much about that at the moment. I work for, just a bit of a brief background, I work for company Legionella Control International. We're a specialist Legionella consultancy. We just deal with Legionella matters. We've been around since 2005, and we cover all aspects of Legionella control, both here in the UK and internationally. We get involved in quite a few Legionella outbreak investigations, and we are expert witnesses in several Legionella cases. We are also the national authorising engineers for NHS property services as well as other NHS properties, NHS trusts around the country. So we do have quite a very in-depth knowledge regarding Legionella. So as you can see on the screen here, this is what a Legionella bug actually looks like. And I mentioned at the beginning about why risk assessing and not testing and obviously the COVID situation currently. Legionella does love stagnant water, and obviously with COVID, there's been many buildings that have been left stagnant and the water not used, and Legionella has an opportunity to multiply. But the essential thing with Legionella is to comply with the regulations, which we go on to, or should I say the approved code practice, which we'll talk briefly on, is various steps of compliance. And the very first step is risk assessing. It's not necessarily doing testing. So remember, with testing, all you're doing is testing to see in 1 litre of water, there is no Legionella in that 1 litre. But risk assessing is the way forward, and that is the keystone to Legionella control in the built environment. So I'll just I'll just go through the presentation. So we'll have a quick look at, very brief look at Legionella and its origins, and we'll look at what is called the causal chain. Now, the causal chain is principally a series of events. So if all these things happen, then there will be a case of Legionnaires disease. So we'll have a look at that. That's quite important. And then we'll have a brief overview of the legal requirements and the basic design of hot and cold water systems. So said, you know, this is amazingly we do 5-day courses on Legionella. So trying to condense a subject down to sort of like a 30-minute presentation, it is a bit challenging. So so initially there was the first case back in 1976. This is where the name comes from, Legionnaires disease and Legionella bacteria, is that in Pennsylvania, in the Stratford Hotel, people started keeling over from this mystery illness. They started developing a cough, persistent cough, high temperatures, and unfortunately 34 people died of it. This was at the time an unknown illness. It took them over a year to actually identify the cause of the illness, and that was put down to this new, inverted commas, new bug called Legionella pneumophila. And this particular building that you can see here, that's the hotel. The building was so riddled with Legionella, both in the cooling towers as well as in the domestic water systems, that they had to knock down the hotel, level it. They could not get rid of it. So that hotel is no longer standing because they could not get rid of the Legionella, because in the water system, what had happened was, which we'll talk about briefly, is biofilms had been created within the water system, and the Legionella hid within the biofilms, and all the processes that they tried to do to get rid of the bug, they couldn't. So they in fact knocked down the building. You know, Legionella, you know, I said sort of like, you know, this new bug Legionella, but in fact, in cases where it's actually in certain parts of the states, they mummify or preserve bodies, and Legionella has been identified from lung tissues found in people who were mummified in the 1940s in the States. So it's always been around, it just hasn't been identified before. So as I said, the very first outbreak was back in '76, and the most recent primary outbreak, large outbreak that we've come across here in the UK anyway, dates back in the Scottish, up in Edinburgh, and that resulted in several deaths. Another outbreak, quite a high-profile outbreak, was the Barrow Furnace outbreak, and as a result of the Barrow Furnace outbreak, the HSC started this intervention program. This is where they randomly visited sites, especially those ones with cooling towers, but generally sites throughout the UK, looking for the level of compliance with Legionella regulations and approved code of practice. And this is principally because with the Barrow Furnace case, the prime cause of the outbreak was poor communication. So in that particular case, there was cooling towers that actually caused the outbreak, and one part of the council thought they had renewed the contract with water treatment contractors, and another part of the council thought someone else was doing it. So there was miscommunication, and what happened in the end was that the cooling tower operated with no adequate water treatment, and as a result, Legionella rapidly grew within the cooling tower, and unfortunately resulted in 7 deaths. So everyone, well, not everyone, but most people have heard of Legionnaires' disease. Legionnaires' disease is the fatal disease, but there is also other diseases caused by Legionella bacteria. In fact, there are 65 different species of Legionella bacteria that I've discovered so far. And the various different diseases that you do come across is Pontiac fever and Lockyer fever. These are named from where they actually were first discovered. So in Lockyer fever was actually a place up in Scotland. This does not cause fatalities, but and the incubation period is quite short, only 2 to 3 days, but it's associated with very high temperatures, but no one actually has currently died from Lockyer fever. Lockyer fever isn't just present within the village of Lockyer. It's just the type of Legionella that was identified in that particular outbreak in that town. So Legionella is Legionnaires' disease. That has a longer incubation period, 2 to 10 days. And what happens is that initially you have a dry cough. It's actually there are similarities between the symptoms of Legionnaires' disease and COVID, by the way. So you actually start off with a dry cough, a persistent cough. This then leads to high temperatures, muscle aches, headaches, diarrhea, vomiting, loss of mental capacity in the later stages. It is treatable by antibiotics. There is about a 8% mortality rate that comes with someone who contracts Legionnaires' disease. But if you're in one of the higher risk groups, which we'll talk about a bit later, that mortality rate can go up to as high as 30%. So it is a very nasty disease, and it can be a life-changing disease as well. There's quite a few cases where people contract Legionnaires' disease and they're never able to go back to their normal life or normal work ever again because their lung capacity is massively reduced. Also, as well, Legionnaires' disease can cause septicemia in some patients, which in extreme cases, talking about the amputation of limbs, etc., to save the patient. So it is a very nasty disease. It is not considered contagious. That is, it's not like COVID in that way. That is not transmissible from one person to another. And the bizarre thing with Legionella as well, it was a fairly bizarre thing, is that I've got a glass of water here. If this water contained Legionella bacteria, it'd be absolutely fine for me to drink it. But if I got a straw and blew bubbles into it, therefore creating an aerosol, and because my face is so close to the surface of the water, I'd been inhaling that aerosol, I could contract Legionnaires' disease. Legionella is, you contract Legionnaires' disease by the inhalation of aerosols which contain Legionella bacteria. And as a general rule of thumb, the finer the aerosol, the greater the chance of you contracting full-blown Legionnaires' disease. This is because the smaller the aerosol, the further it travels within your lung, and therefore it's a greater chance for you to contract Legionnaires' disease. Okay. So in the UK, the number of cases in 2019 anyway, we don't have the data yet for 2020 because of COVID mainly. was only 500 odd cases, but this is grossly underreported. I was talking to Alan before and saying about in Germany, the number of cases runs into thousands, about 6,000 per year. And that's because if you present with Legionella type symptoms to a hospital in Germany, you get instantly tested for Legionnaires disease. And that's not the case over here. So there is massively underreporting currently. So who is at risk? It is possible that young people can contract Legionnaires disease and die from Legionnaires disease, but the people who are at greater risk are those people over 45, the smokers, the heavy drinkers, those with any lung disease or heart problems. This is because of the density of, generally because of the density of someone's lungs. So smokers' lungs are quite, if you took a cross section of them, they're quite holy because of the damage of smoking. And that means that the bacteria can penetrate deeper into the lung tissue and then cause Legionnaires disease. A strange statistic is men are statistically 3 times more likely, more susceptible than women in contracting Legionnaires disease. There is no scientific reason why this is the case. What they do think is that it's because of the occupations rather than some biological difference between men and women. And that's, things are changing, but people who are more likely to get exposed to Legionnaires disease are those people who are working in heavy industries where you've got cooling towers present, or those people involved in maintenance. I know things are changing, thankfully, but currently men are still 3 times more susceptible than women. With the age groups as well, as you can see, very young babies can actually get Legionnaires disease, but the risk is very, very small. I know there has been cases that have hit the headlines about babies contracting Legionnaires disease from birthing pools and things like that. But generally, because their lungs are so dense, they are much lower risk of contracting Legionnaires disease. As you can see, the group that is at higher risk are the sort of like the 50 to 59-year-olds, and mainly men. So, as I've said before, Legionnaires disease carries 8% fatality. This is a picture of a normal, healthy lung. When someone contracts Legionnaires disease, what happens is the lung, after infection, becomes scarred. So the area that you can see on the picture there should all be black, but in fact, you can see that it's full of scar tissues. And that actually impacts someone's lung capacity greatly and can have a life-changing impact on them. So just to summarize this brief bit here, you've got with Legionella, there's various different forms of Legionnosis. Legionnaires disease, Pontiac fever, Lockheed fever are the typical ones, but it's Legionnaires disease itself which is the fatal one. Okay, so there is similarities between COVID and Legionnaires disease. It affects, if Legionnaires disease is more prevalent in sorry, my cat is just about to destroy my computer. Sorry, cat move. Sorry. so there is similarities between COVID. Legionnaires disease affects the lungs, so does COVID. But the main aspect of that is different, is that Legionnaires disease is not contracted from one person to another person. Okay. So what you do find is that the incidence of Legionnaires disease peaks during the summer months, and we are expecting quite a significant peak in Legionnaires disease this year, because of the fact that people are not in their workplace, water systems aren't being used as they're intended, so you get stagnation of the water systems. And when you have stagnation, Legionella bacteria starts growing. Cat. Just I'm just going to shoo the cat. I do apologize about this. Very unprofessional. Just cat move. Come on, move. Okay, sorry about that. I need, because he will just carry on meowing and meowing and meowing until I feed him. So so it's best stopping and restarting. So so the reason why there is a peak in the summer months is because of temperature. Legionella is a very temperature dependent organism. It grows between 20 and 45 degrees. Outside of this, so below 20 degrees, it doesn't die off, but it doesn't multiply so quickly. And above 45 degrees, it starts dying off. So in the summer months, you have buildings generally warmer, cooling towers have to work harder. People are returning from holidays where they go to foreign countries where cooling towers aren't so well regulated. And that's what largely accounts for the seasonal fluctuations in Legionella outbreaks. I'll mention about that. So I'll talk about this very briefly about biofilm. So what happens when the water system isn't used regularly is biofilms can form within the pipework in a building. So this is commonly, in extreme cases, you can see this when if you open up a tap which hasn't been used for a long time and you get like a slime coming out of it, that is a biofilm. These biofilms are generally made out of a bacteria called Pseudomonas. Pseudomonas isn't generally harmful to human health, but what happens is these biofilms form, and Legionella can hide within the biofilm, so you can have your high temperatures to try and control Legionella, or chlorine, or whatever you use your control measure, try and control Legionella in your building, but it won't penetrate through the biofilms. So and that's what caused the demolition of the original hotel, which was the source of the first outbreak. So biofilms can only form when there is low activity, or sort of like stagnant, slow flowing water. So if the water is kept moving, then biofilms can't form. So there are some golden rules with Legionella, which I'll talk about, which is sort of like keep hot water hot, so keep hot water above 50 at the outlet, keep cold water cold, below 20, keep water moving, and keep your water systems clean. And that is a way to combat Legionella, really. As I've said, the ideal temperature zone for Legionella is 20 to 45. Legionella can actually use nutrients within the water system to grow. So things like the presence of hemp joints is a big no-no. You can't use hemp anymore. And the presence of sludge and rust has also been associated with Legionella bacteria. Legionella bacteria is an aerobic bacteria, which means that it can only grow in the presence of oxygen. So as I've said, and this is a key message, if one message you take from tonight is this, that is that's worth everything really, is to combat Legionella. There are 4 golden rules. So you have to keep hot water hot, keep cold water cold, keep water moving, and keep your water systems clean. So if you follow those general rules, you will minimize the risk of any Legionella outbreak or growth within your water system. It's all to do with minimization. It's not, you can never eliminate the Legionella risk, because unfortunately Legionella comes in to your building via the cold water mains in very low numbers, but that's what happens. And then once it's in the building, it then starts multiplying greatly. Okay. So this is talking about the causal chain. I think I'll skip over this bit, but this is generally the first thing that you must do to comply with L8, that's approved code of practice L8 and HSG 274, is to have a Legionella water risk assessment. So as part of the risk assessment, they will look at the causal chain. They'll look at where in the water system Legionella bacteria can grow. Are there conditions likely to encourage growth, and is there any areas where aerosol can be generated? So the causal chain, as I've mentioned before, is there's 6 steps to the causal chain. The first step, so if you break any of these steps, then there will not be a outbreak of Legionnaires disease. So the first one is contamination. So if the water coming into your building is free of Legionella, then you're not going to have an issue. But the trouble is that water coming into your building will contain low levels of Legionella bacteria. So you need to minimize the contamination step as much as practically possible by ensuring that things like cold water storage tanks are clean, and you are providing wholesome water. So the second step, once water comes into your building, is amplification step. So this is, can Legionella grow within your water system? So as I've said earlier, if you keep your hot water hot and your cold water cold, then you are reducing the possibility of Legionella growth within your water system. So to actually reduce the amplification step, follow the golden rules. And again, transmission. Now, as I've said before, Legionella is, you can only contract Legionnaires disease by the inhalation of Legionella bacteria in an aerosol. So it's inhalation of aerosols which contain Legionella bacteria. So if you're not producing aerosols, then for instance, like showers, spray taps, things like that, if you don't have those on site, then you are not, then there's no method for Legionella to be transmitted from the water into someone's lungs. Yeah. So again, exposure, the 4th stage is exposure. So you can manage the exposure by generally safe practices. So if you do have fire reels, making sure that they are tested when out of hours, when there's low occupancy, and then when they do such tests, that they reduce the minimize the amount of aerosol produced. The stage that you cannot really do anything about is susceptible individuals. So these are individuals who are over 45, smokers, male, etc. So you can only way that you can actually stop this or break this link is to ban those people from your site, which obviously you can't do. But the other steps you can actually help to actually reduce and eliminate Legionella bacteria growth within your site. And the very final step, which was very much identified in the Barrow and Furnace outbreak, was having good management systems. So making sure that on a monthly basis, water temperatures are taken from the sentinels. Sentinels are classified as the nearest and furthest points on a water system, so that you can actually see whether you are having good temperature control of your site. Now, the main the typical way to control Legionella is through temperature. So not chemicals. That is the very last course of action that you should be undertaking, unless it's a cooling tower. This is I'm talking about for domestic systems. So cooling towers, you need chemicals. You need a lot of them, and they should be correctly dosed. But for domestic hot water systems, you should be able to manage it using temperature as a control. So why do we do risk assessments? We do risk assessments because you have to identify the risk a property poses to the users of that property. So a risk assessment is the most vital step. It forms the basis of creating a written scheme, monitoring programs, etc. How you manage Legionella on site. You first of all have to identify the risk, and then have strategies to manage that risk. Okay. So this is how it flows. Really, it's risk assessment first, then written scheme. So this is sometimes called scheme of precautions, and then task planner. So this is like things like doing monthly temperature checks, quarterly descaling, cleaning and descaling of shower heads, etc. And also recording this in a logbook, which you have to keep the records for 5 years, by the way. So the legislation or guidance around the control of Legionella is the Health and Safety Executives Approved Code of Practice, which is commonly called as L8. You can download these from the HSC website, and HSG 274. Now L8 tells you exactly, just briefly tells you exactly, what you must do to comply. But the HSG 274 is very much sort of like a how-to guide. So it takes the elements of L8 and which says, the water must be fit for purpose. It must be, the hot water temperature must be stored at 60 degrees and be at the outlet of 50 degrees, etc. But in HSG 274, it tells you how to resolve these issues. It's a very, very useful guide. And there's actually split up into 3 guides. HSG 274 Part 1, which is to do with cooling towers. Part 2 is hot and cold water systems. And Part 3 is any other risk systems. She was one of our directors, was the chair of the steering group who wrote both L8 and HSG 274. L8 is fine, but HSG 274 is really good at if you want to try and control Legionella on your site. Listed here as well is HTMs. Now these you probably don't get involved in, but HTMs are health trust memorandums. This is more to do with the NHS setting. So I will not go into those, but sort of like that's just to say that because it's NHS, where you've got people at high risk again, the restrictions or sort of like the demands with regards to Legionella control is much greater. Okay. So also as well, something that people do tend to forget is that IOSH is also applicable to Legionella as well, because there's an element in IOSH about biological materials, and that's what Legionella comes under. Okay. So once you have your risk assessment in place, it will from that you need to create a written scheme or a scheme of precautions, basically a monitoring program. So when I talk about monitoring programs, I'm not talking about taking Legionella samples. You only take Legionella samples in very specific cases. You take Legionella samples if you've got a cooling tower, where you have to take them on a quarterly basis. You you take Legionella samples if your control measures, i.e. hot, let's say temperature, fail. And the only other time when you do take Legionella samples is if you suspect that there is a contamination of the water system, or it's in a hospital setting and it's in a high risk ward. Okay. What you must do generally is take water temperatures. So from hot water system, you need to take hot water temperatures on a monthly basis at the sentinel outlets, which is the nearest and furthest, and it should be a minimum of 50 degrees. These are the unblended outlets, not ones controlled by TMVs, that thermostatic mixing valves. Okay. So you should also, on the cold water system, again, take temperatures on a monthly basis and record this activity, and it should be below 20 degrees within 2 minutes of running. With the hot, it needs to be 50 degrees within 1 minute. Not open the tap and let it run until it gets to 50 degrees. That's a non-compliance. It has to hit 50 degrees within 1 minute. Okay. That's why quite often with large systems they have like return loops on them to actually encourage the hot water. And in fact, because we work in the Middle East quite a bit, and in the cold water elements, cold water temperatures never ever, they come in to buildings that are like 27 degrees, so they actually have chillers to cool the cold water down. But anyway, I'm going a bit off the point. So yeah, you need to undertake at the center points nearest and furthest. So on a very simple system like this would be, this wash hand basin would be the furthest, and the storeroom would be the nearest on the hot water system. Obviously, you get more complicated systems, and even a small site might have multiple central points. So all these central points must be monitored on a monthly basis, both the hot and the cold water. So the flushing of outlets. Now you see, because of COVID, many outlets in buildings would be classified as little used outlets. So little used outlets are defined as those outlets that are not used on a weekly basis, which actually means, most office blocks around the country at the moment. So what should be happening is that in those office blocks, the water taps should be flushed on a weekly basis, and it should be, because they are defined as little used outlets. So they should be flushed until the water temperature stabilizes. It used to be that people used to say, well, you flush it for 3 minutes or something. That's not technically correct. It's actually that you flush an outlet until the temperature of that outlet stabilizes and is comparable to the supply water that outlet supplies. So therefore, on a hot water system, if you've got from the calorifier or from your heating source, the water is coming out of that at 50 degrees, then you would expect at the outlet that it should be 50 degrees. If it's not 50 degrees, then you need to flush the outlet until 50 degrees is obtained. This is the flushing of the outlets. This isn't temperature checking. This is to do with stimulating flow. As I've said previously, Legionella loves stagnant water. So if you stimulate the flow, stimulate the water, then you reduce the likelihood of Legionella bacteria growing within your water system. Okay. So this is this is taken from a scientific paper. This is a useful little graph. It shows the effectiveness of flushing little used outlets. What you do find is that the task for flushing little used outlets is quite often missed and not done correctly. And this shows you how on this particular site where we're taking, would be total viable counts, taking total viable counts, and the levels are quite high. but then because it's actually not being frequently used, this outlet, and then when they start the weekly flushing, it actually reduces it down to basically 0, and then when they stop flushing, it raises back up again. So you can imagine with the whole thing with COVID at the moment, you know, all these little used outlets everywhere, you know, it could potentially be bacteria growing quite nicely within them. So it is really important that little used outlets are flushed regularly. This is an example. It's actually in a hospital. This one where they didn't perform surgery there, I don't think. But this is definitely, look, these are examples of outlets which are not classed as little used outlets by the people on site, but obviously is, because you can't even get access to them. So, you know, a little used outlet, it's really important to combat Legionella growth is to flush little used outlets. There's various other examples of this as well. You know, a little used outlet is, actually, I don't think this video will work actually. Oh, will it? So this is just really pushing my internet now. So this is an example of what you should be doing when you're flushing outlets. So he's doing the temperature, taking the temperature checks to see when the temperature stabilizes, and only once it stabilizes does he then think that that outlet has been adequately flushed. So it's important, you know, not necessarily recording the temperature at this point, making sure that the outlet has been flushed adequately. So your internet. So one of the other elements that you should do when you're designing a water monitoring program is to make sure that the showers and any spray taps are also form part of this program, and they should be cleaned and descaled on a quarterly basis. This is because showers and spray taps create masses of aerosols, and when you're creating aerosols, there's a greater risk of someone breathing in those aerosols and developing Legionnaires disease. So, okay. So, you know, one that they do generally forget about is like the pot wash ones, and those associated with point of use heaters or instantaneous heaters, like in this case here. You know, the trouble is controlling Legionella is quite an environmentally unfriendly thing to do, because what you're wanting to do is keep water moving. So you're flushing taps, wasting water. You need to keep the hot water temperatures high, which obviously has an environmental impact. But you know, it is important to undertake these, because otherwise, what will happen is Legionella bacteria will grow. So these are some of the sort of like typical problems that you do come across. So from a Legionella point of view, scale deposits, and no, I haven't really touched on scale deposits that much, but they have found that the scale deposits themselves form basically a home for Legionella to actually grow quite happily in, and as a result, even if your temperatures are quite high, deep within the scale, the temperatures will be lower, and Legionella can grow within those scale deposits. See, there's one being formed there, another examples of scale deposits there. This one as well has got scale deposits and things called flow straighteners, which if that was in NHS, that would be frowned upon. So it's just a general sort of like indication of general awareness at this sort of stage. So you've got some sort of idea. You know, the key things are that with L8 and HSG 274, the first step to compliance is undertaking Legionella risk assessments, and from that you'll form, or as part of the risk assessment, you will have a written scheme, and that written scheme will involve undertaking temperature tasks, doing sentinel temperature checks, doing descaling of showers and spray taps, and then from there you are actually controlling Legionella risk on your site. So and it's the key message is to keep hot water hot, cold water cold, keep the water moving, keep it clean as well. So we do, ourselves, we do offering, sort of like sampling services, but it's really is only under those particular circumstances should you think about doing sampling. You can, of course, sample for reassurance, but it can give you false reassurance because all you're doing is proving that there's no Legionella in that 1 litre of water that you sampled. So I think that is the end of my presentation. I know it's quite condensed. I hope you all grasped it, because I know I went at quite some rate of knots at some points.
Can I say, Jamie, thank you very much for that. Looking at the chat functions, we've got quite a few questions, so I'll hand over to Rosilla, who's been taking note, hopefully, and fire the questions to you. So over to you, Rosilla.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Right, I've got quite a number of questions for you, Jamie. So the first one we've got is from Nikki. Can we cover natural water-fed systems like greenhouses and polytunnels, and management tips for storage and use of the water?
Okay, so with if you spoke to a water treatment company, they would say put loads of chemicals there and get it all sorted. But the trouble is that it would actually destroy the reed. Is it reed beds? Is it?
I don't. It says greenhouses and polytunnels. So yeah.
Hello.
So
if it's okay, I'll come in. It is it's reed bed. So basically, we're taking water out of our RSPB sites to feed our polytunnels, so we can grow on more reeds for replantation.
Yeah,
that's any help.
So you must stay away from any chemical treatment, because that will destroy your reed beds totally, and also cause all sorts of issues. You can. The first thing I would say is obviously doing a risk assessment. But there are other sort of like strategies to reduce your Legionella risk. One strategy is using ultraviolet, but the trouble is ultraviolet only works if the water is crystal clear. So you would need to have a series of filters to actually ensure that the water going in there is crystal clear, as in going into the UV arrangements. But that is a way to reduce your Legionella risk. And also as well, instead of having high pressure sprays, think about maybe a more of a trickle system, so therefore you're not actually creating that much aerosol. So you should look at it as in the causal chain, really, and sort of like trying to minimize the Legionella, the amount of aerosol that you're producing. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. In part, can I all be cheeky and just check in about so when we've got obviously a lot of water in the polytunnel, quite nice temperatures, turning into quite a humid environment, is there still potentially a Legionella risk for water in the atmosphere in that respect?
If it is, are they spraying it from height to create that humidity? Are they?
No, it's just happening because there's lots of water in there in the reed trays, and it's hot. So natural evaporation and hitting the roof, and happy days.
Yeah, you see, there is. You see, the thing about it is you can get. It's not Legionella pneumophila. There's a different sort of Legionella that you get from compost, which people have contracted Legionnaires disease from that, and that's to do with the fact of in a moist environment. So definitely, I would say that it would need to be risk assessed and looked at the particular details, circumstances there on site, really, because there is a possibility that of Legionella being in the atmosphere, and that sort of like damp sort of like environment.
Thank you, Jamie. We've got a question from Julia. She's asking if there's any advice that you've got for water drinking fountains in schools.
Yeah, so the drinking fountains in schools, generally the ones outside pose more of a risk because the pipework probably isn't insulated. With those ones, if they are used on a weekly basis, then the risk is, because it is only cold water supplied to these drinking fountains, the actual risk is fairly low. So, but they should, if they're not used on a weekly basis, they should be flushed on a weekly basis. But the risk is relatively low because it is cold water.
Right, thank you. So I presume that when it's like summer holidays and things like that, they need to add that onto their checklist to
yes,
flush
they
regularly.
do. Yeah, the caretaker has to add that onto their list, and obviously as well when they're doing the temperature checks, if they are not hitting, if it's above 20 degrees, then they should investigate further to see whether what is the cause of the high cold water temperatures in those drinking fountains. And it's probably down to things like lack of insulation, or even hot pipe touching the cold pipe that feeds the drinking fountain. So, but the water from that drinking fountain should be below 20 degrees within 2 minutes.
Right, thank you. So we've got a question from Andrew. So,
Okay.
What is the risk of Legionella from the water tanks of caravans and motorhomes when left over a winter period?
The risk, there is a risk because it's a stored body of water, but provided when it goes back into operation, if they drain that water without creating an aerosol, so they drain it totally, because if there's no water, there's no risk, and then refilling it, and then the hot water that goes through the water heater, make sure that it is cranked up to as high as it can go and be at 60 degrees, preferably, to kill any bacteria that there are lurking within that water heater itself.
Right, thank you. So anybody who's thinking of getting their caravans or motorhomes out this summer, good tips for them.
Yeah, drain the tanks on them, refill them, and with a hot water cylinder or hot water instantaneous heater, make sure that it's cranked up to the maximum, preferably 60 degrees, and allow the bacteria to heat that up for at least an hour. Well, you don't need it that long, but if you can, an hour, and that will kill off any bugs within the system.
Wonderful, thank you. So next question, we've got quite a few questions today for you, actually. It just shows the interest. So Gemma, and she's asking, as businesses reopen, what is the best thing that they can do to make sure they are not part of the jump in Legionella cases that you're expecting?
Flushing, even at this late stage, flushing is still, you should still do it. So if they can do weekly flushing, that is reducing your Legionella risk. Obviously, if that building has been unoccupied for a prolonged period of time, then you need to take safeguards regarding the person who is flushing. So therefore, if they're flushing like showers, things like that, then they should remove the shower heads So you're reducing the amount of aerosols, and it's also quite a good idea when you are flushing these buildings that haven't been used for a prolonged period of time to actually have like sponges put into washhand basins. So therefore, as the water hits the sponge, few aerosols are generated, and also making sure that when you're turning on the taps, you don't turn them on full blast, you turn them on half open. So you are draining the system or flushing the system without generating masses of aerosols. So you're trying to reduce the amount of aerosols that you are producing, because you know the masks that you can get to try and combat the inhalation of aerosols that contain Legionella bacteria, you know, they aren't perfect, you know, like most masks, they are not perfect. So you know, I always believe PPE is the last line of defense rather than the first line. But
yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's really good tips. I never knew about the sponges actually, so thank you for that.
I got masses of useless information.
It's great. I love information like that. Keep it coming. So we've got a question from Patrick. Do you have to record your temperatures and logbook, or can you use an electronic system?
You can use an electronic system. You just need to make sure that you keep that data for 5 years. So
wonderful. Thank you. Oh, I've got a question for you as well, actually. So with the reopening of businesses in step 3 of the roadmap, have you actually seen an increase in Legionellosis or any outbreaks at all?
We have seen through our labs, we have seen an increase in Legionella positives. So you know, and there has been a number of Legionella cases, but it's not, you know, the figures aren't all out yet, but we have found that we are getting involved in quite a few cases where there's suspected Legionella outbreaks. And quite a few of those, by the way, seem to be the fact that not necessarily, bizarrely, not actually people going back to work, people in this period where people are furloughed, having these hot tubs, inflatable hot tubs in their gardens.
Yeah.
We're getting quite a few, there's quite a few cases regarding those actually.
Actually, there was a question on that a bit later on that I noticed in the chat, the good old hot tubs. So yeah, that's probably making a comeback with more domestic hot tubs by the sounds of it.
Yeah, because they're fairly cheap, I think, and people don't know how to care for them, and they become a bacterial soup.
Okay, lovely, thank you. So we've got a question from Alan, our chair. So with thermal mixer valves, how would you check the temperature to ensure it meets the requirements?
Okay, so thermostatic mixing valve, it basically, you've got a hot pipe and a cold pipe, and it blends together at the TMV, and then out of there is mixed temperature. So to check that the mixing valve is working correctly, is that you have to take a temperature from the hot pipe work, and that's using a contact probe, and also the cold pipe work as well as from the outlets from the TMV itself. So that's the only way to do it. So you're actually doing 3 temperature checks on a TMV, and that's because if you just had just took the temperature on the outlet and it was sort of like, you know, 41 degrees, it might be 41 degrees because the hot going into the TMV is at 41 degrees. So when in fact it should be at 50 degrees minimum.
Okay, lovely. Sorry, I'm just right. A question from Paul. In a multi-occupancy workplace building, who has a duty to get Legionella risk assessment carried out?
sorry. It really depends on the lease. To give you a guideline, if in that circumstance, if a tap breaks, who's responsible for it? So whoever is responsible for it is therefore responsible for the water system, and therefore responsible for doing or instructing the Legionella risk assessment, if you see what I mean. So it does depend on the lease agreements, but as a general rule of thumb, if the landlord, if the tap breaks and the landlord has to fix it, then generally he's obviously responsible then for the water system, and it's his responsibility to get a Legionella risk assessment done, but he has to share with you the results of that Legionella risk assessment.
Lovely, thank you.
Jamie, if I may just come in just as a point of clarification for my question, if I may, apologies for cutting in. So I guess what I was trying to get at was is there any vicarious liability on the tenant as well as the landlord, should there be a Legionella outbreak within a workplace?
If it is the landlord's responsibility, then it's for the landlord to undertake the risk is all lies with the landlord. So for instance, if it is that a tap breaks and the landlord fixes it, then it is for the landlord who is then responsible for doing the temperature checks, doing, making sure that the hot water's hot, cold water's cold, etc., etc. Now, if what quite often happens is that within a multi-occupancy building, within the tenanted demise, it's actually the tenant's responsibility. So they might have a point of use heater underneath the sink or something, and it's the landlord's responsibility is only to provide a cold feed into that tenanted area. And then in those circumstances, it would be the tenant that would be responsible. Do you see what I mean?
I see. Thank you. Yeah, I get that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So another question from Alan. What determines whether a leg is dead or not? Sorry, excuse me a moment.
What determines a dead leg? So actually there's actually two forms, just to complicate things. So there's a dead leg, which is a period of pipe work which has got the capability of being flushed. That's called a dead leg, or a dead end, and the dead end is where there's no capability of that piece of pipe work to be flushed. So there's dead ends and dead legs. But the classification generally with a dead leg is if the dead leg is more than 2.5 times the width of the live pipework. So as a general rule. So in some buildings where you've got massive mains pipework coming into the building, and you've got a little stub of a dead leg, that's not actually classed as a dead leg at all. So it's 2.5 times the width of the actual live pipework.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. So a question from Gemma. What is the risk of Legionella in a domestic setting, for example, for nursing staff or others who work in the homes of the general public?
Generally, because the smaller the system, the smaller the volume of the system, the smaller the risk. So in a general domestic situation, the risk is fairly low because the water is being used on a regular basis. It's not to say that there is no risk, and also you are very dependent upon how the householders use that water. So we were involved with a housing association in southern England where they were there was talk about them being prosecuted, and that was because what happened in that circumstance is they had set the immersion heater to be at 60 degrees, but the tenant had actually turned it down to 30 degrees to save money, and unfortunately she contracted Legionnaires disease and died. But you know, in those sorts, you are exposed, I suppose, to those circumstances when you are going into those sort of like domestic settings. But generally, domestic properties have a lower risk because they are frequently used and also they're smaller volume systems.
Right, thank you for that. Question from Caroline: what are the Legionella controls for outside sprinkler systems?
Well, you should really refer to, it should be covered in your risk assessment, but the controls really, when you're talking about fountains and things like that, there's different, they need to be risk assessed and see whether you know, a water treatment regime is applicable in those circumstances. So some of the big public fountains, you know, they do have water treatment regimes associated with it. If you're talking about in a small scale setting, for instance, like in a care home.
Hi, it's Caroline here. Just to give some context, it's on a construction site, so to keep dust levels down. So there's like sprinkler systems that are underneath the sort of area and sprinkle across the sort of construction site area for dust control.
Oh, dust control, okay. And do they have like a dowser, do they, that goes up and down the site as well and things like that?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, so unfortunately what they should do is with the dowser is actually drain that at the end of the shift and refill it every day because the water shouldn't be allowed to stagnate within it. With the sprinkler systems themselves, are they sort of like below ground or are they above ground? Aren't they? They would be above.
Bit of both. Obviously, the mains comes underground, and then the sprinkler part of it is above ground.
Okay. So obviously, well, straight away, there needs to be a one-way valve or RPZ valve to protect the mains. Otherwise, we're getting problems with the water board, water provider, and that system should be able to be, so they should drain that system, you know, every day after they've finished use. They should actually have the capability of draining it, which should be quite simple. You just put a break in it and they can then drain it, so therefore it's not fully charged and just left stagnant over, you know, especially with COVID and, you know, non-weekend working and things like that and the hot weather, because obviously that sprinkler system won't have any form of insulation because it's not designed to have, is it?
No, thank you.
Yeah, so drain when you finish use, really.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, that's really helpful.
But it's really important that they do fit a break, either RPZ valve or break tank, to protect the public mains coming into site. This isn't a Legionella issue. This is a like compliance issue, because otherwise you're in contravention of the 1999 water bylaws or water fitment regulations.
Okay, I will check.
Okay.
Thanks for that detailed answer, Jamie. This has just opened up to so many different sort of water systems. So the next question we've got is from Nick, and he's asking, is it worth mentioning the risks from using pressure washers, especially from water butts and similar sources?
Yeah, it does depend, really. You know, you know, with the jet washers, they should be drained after use, and it's preferable that they do not use the water butts water for that purpose, because the water in the water butts have been there stagnant for unknown period of time. So you do have then the possibility of Legionella being present within the water butts, and there has been cases associated with cases of Legionnaires disease associated with these water butts, and the hose is being attached to water butts. So they using the water butts for for watering, for having what's the thing that you use to water plants? I can't remember. Watering can,
yeah.
Watering can, yes. You can use that, that's fine, but not in a pressurized system, where you're actually creating loads of aerosols. In those sorts of circumstances, you really should be using mains.
Right, thank you, Jamie. I mean, we're sort of running out of time a little bit, so I think we've got a few more questions. So I think I'll just pick one more maybe, because some of these have been probably covered slightly. So we've got something about satellite workplaces. So that's probably similar to when people, you're saying coming back to work. There's an interesting one here from Richard with regards to caravans, motorhomes. Does flushing with a Milton sterilising solution kill off Legionella? Would that be suitable?
Yes, Milton fluid is fine about killing off Legionella, and it's has less COSH implications as bleach, but bleach is does have COSH implications obviously, but bleach is very cheap. But yes, Milton fluid is absolutely fine. But remember, when you are doing that, they need to descale the shower or whatever, because the Milton fluid won't penetrate any scale.
Okay, and do they need to make sure that it's washed out properly, because it could increase the pH? Or
they need to make sure that after they've used it, they do flush it out. I was involved in a case in London where was in the city where the cleaner put acid into a vending machine and to descale it, and left it over the weekend. And what happened was one of the city bankers took a drink from the vending machine and had massive levels, not acid actually, massive levels of copper, which actually caused him life-changing injuries. So it's really important to flush things through. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and thank you everyone for your questions. And I think I'll hand back over to our chair, Alan. Alan? Don't know where Alan's gone.
It looks as though Alan may well have dropped off. Technical problems with his PC. No, I see he's back. He's back.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Sorry about that. I've had a lot of technical issues tonight. Jamie, I'd just like to say thanks very much. And a bit of feedback. I think we've had 88 members logged in tonight, which is great. And judging by the chat functions and the questions, there's been loads of questions. We could be here another 2 hours, I think, and keep you in the hot seat for another 2 hours at least. So for those that didn't get the question answered, I'm ever so sorry, but we have to keep to a timetable. But thank you for your questions, and please feel free to attend the rest of our meetings, and hopefully you'll get your questions answered. Jamie, I've got to say it was really interesting, very fascinating, and very topical, very, very topical. So I'd just like to say a really big thank you for your time and your effort with the presentation. Again, a lot of the chat comments were saying, what a good presentation it was, and the way that you delivered it was in a nice manner, so that it was easy to understand. So, from behalf of our members and myself and the team, obviously, Eastmid, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to keep in touch with you, because it could be a good subject moving forward for maybe one of our regional branches which could be really interesting to take it further and a wider audience. So
Yeah,
I'll be in touch.
definitely.
Sorry, you go, Jamie.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sorry about the cat intrusion. Sorry about that.
It's okay. So thanks for that. Before everybody goes and logs off, can I just say thank you very much for your time tonight. Please be mindful of the 22nd of July at 7 p.m. for our next meeting, which is coaching safer behaviours. And thanks again for your attendance. And it's been brilliant.